Good evening, Dr. Barry, TAs, and also fortunate enough to see this. I'm Will Becker, and this is my circuits design project. So the purpose of my design is to basically be off light. So while an electrical device is on, it is charging a capacitor, and when the device is off, it flips a switch, and that capacitor is used to power an LED light, which tells you that the device is being powered off. So here's my circuit schematic. So you have a voltage source being the electrical device, running up, charging a capacitor, and running back through this resistor back to itself. Two things here. You have this ground switch, this first switch on the right, which leads to ground. This is for my convenience to take measurements without the circuit running wild. And you have the second switch over here in the middle, which is basically when it's flipped off, it goes into the up position and then runs the LED. So I have two time variables, big T, which is essentially how long the device is being charged for. In real application, this really isn't relevant because you're just gonna be fully charged. Doesn't matter how long it's been running. But little t is important when we get to it later. So some other notes is the normal current running through the LED is 30 milliamps. So this is what it should approximately be that, and normal voltage running across it is 2.2 volts. So some analytics, these are essentially the voltage equations of the capacitor, so how much is being stored within it, and also, so prior to the switch being flipped, how much is being stored in it, after the switch is being flipped, how much voltage is it providing, and we also have current equations. So this first one is the current running through the capacitor while it's being charged, and the second one down here is the current that is providing to the upper loop while it's powering the LED. So some intended values. So in order to reach that normal value, I decided to go with two AAA batteries, 1.5 volts each, so 3 volts. So I calculated that it would take about 1.32 seconds to reach that 2.2 volts in the capacitor. So assuming the capacitor was only charged 2.2 volts, I then found the resistance needed to cause a current of 30 milliamps, which is 73.33 ohms. I decided upon a 67 ohm value, which is why you see that in the schematic. A 47 ohm resistor and two 10 ohm resistors in series. This is just to kind of give a little leeway in case there's any other resistance that isn't accounted for formally. But with a 67 ohm resistance and 2.2 volts, the current should be around 32.8 milliamps. Assuming the capacitor is fully charged at 3 volts, it will take basically 2 seconds for it to drop below that 2.2 volts normal level. So this is my prototype here. As you can see, I actually have 3 batteries instead of 2 because I was only getting about 1 volt per battery. But as you can see, they're all in series, kind of in this top right. You have this black lead leading to the negative end of that. But essentially, it leaves this blue wire. It goes into that first switch. Which then, so right now it's in the ground position, so it's not running. But if you were to flip the other way, it would follow this blue wire into the capacitor. It will leave the capacitor into this switch. If you follow the purple wire, you then take the 10 ohm resistor back to the negative end. If you follow the green wire out of the switch, you go to the LED, which takes to this 47 ohm resistor, which takes to the two 10 ohms, which takes to this second green wire, which takes you back to the capacitor, and you run it through it all over again. So observations prior to the switch being flipped. So before I did anything, I measured the voltage in the batteries, and I was actually getting 3.21 volts, which is better than what I was expecting, honestly. So I then flipped the ground switch, so I was actually letting it charge the capacitor. So at about 3 seconds, I was getting the current across the capacitor was 9.57 milliamps. This is opposed to the calculated 15.9 milliamps. When at t equals 20 seconds, I flipped it off into the ground state, and then I measured the voltage stored in the capacitor, and it was 2.81 volts as opposed to the 3.21 that it should have been. So whenever little t was equal to 0, I then flipped the switch. When little t was equal to 0, V naught, which if you look back in the equations is the kind of voltage that, it's what the voltage equation is based off of, is equal to 2.81 as we found earlier. So the circuit running through the current as soon as I flipped the switch was about 29.42 milliamps. As opposed to the 41.94 milliamps, but the light lit up. That's what matters. So at about 1.5 seconds in, the lights actually shut off. So in my prior calculations, this is like a little shorter. At 3 seconds, this is a shorter time. Pardon me. If the capacitor was charged 3 volts, this is shorter than that time. But at the voltage level of 2.81, this is pretty close. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. But the current through the circuit at this time, about this time, it's a little bit before actually, was 20.68 milliamps, as opposed to the calculated 33.53 milliamps at 1.5 seconds. So whenever t equals 3 seconds, we shut the switch off. So it's just back in the ground position, and we measure the voltage, which is 1.51 volts, as opposed to the 1.8 volts. That is all I have for you. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you in fluids, Dr. Berry.